The blood was still wet when authorities found her sitting in the kitchen, methodically peeling potatoes as if nothing had happened. Behind her, 3 bodies lay arranged in perfect formation on the living room floor, each bearing identical puncture wounds to the neck. When Detective Maria Santos asked 12-year-old Julia Cruz what had happened to her family, the girl looked up with eyes as dark as coal and whispered, "I fed them to him. He was so hungry." This was November 15, 2004, in the remote village of Cañovanas, Puerto Rico, where the legend of the chupacabra had terrorized residents for nearly a decade. But what investigators discovered in the Cruz household would challenge everything they thought they knew about both childhood psychology and the supernatural. Julia Cruz hadn't just witnessed a monster attack, she had orchestrated it. The case files from the Puerto Rico Department of Justice, obtained through Freedom of Information requests, reveal a story so disturbing that local authorities suppressed most details for over 15 years. Court transcripts show that Julia claimed to have been communicating with the chupacabra for months before the murders, feeding it small animals from the family farm in exchange for what she called special friendship. But the creature's appetite had grown, and Julia's definition of friendship had evolved into something far more sinister. Before we continue with this haunting tale of childhood manipulation and supernatural horror, I want to hear from you. What's the most unexplained event you've ever witnessed? The Julia Cruz case forces us to confront uncomfortable questions about the intersection of belief, mental illness, and genuine mystery. Leave a comment sharing your thoughts, and don't forget to subscribe for more disturbing true stories that challenge our understanding of reality. The discovery at the Cruz home would ultimately expose not just one girl's descent into madness, but an entire community's willingness to believe in monsters rather than confront the human darkness living among them. Cañovanas sits in the mountainous interior of Puerto Rico, 30 miles southwest of San Juan, where dense tropical forests create shadows that seem to swallow sound itself. In 2004, this community of barely 3,000 residents lived under a cloud of fear that had persisted since the first chupacabra sightings in 1995. Local police records show over 200 reported animal deaths in the 9 years leading up to the Cruz murders, each bearing the characteristic twin puncture wounds that had become the creature's calling card. The Cruz family had arrived in Cañovanas in 2001, purchasing a small coffee farm on the outskirts of town with money sent by relatives working in New York. Roberto Cruz, 42, had been a construction worker in San Juan before deciding that rural life would be better for his children. His wife, Carmen, 38, was a devout Catholic who taught Sunday school at the local parish. Their 3 children, Miguel, 16, Sofia, 14, and Julia, 12, had initially struggled with the transition from city to country life. The family farm consisted of 15 acres of coffee plants interspersed with plantain trees and a small area dedicated to raising chickens and goats. Neighbors described the Cruzes as hard-working people who kept mostly to themselves, though Carmen was known for her kindness to anyone who needed help. Roberto had a reputation as a skilled mechanic who could fix anything, and he often helped other farmers repair their equipment without asking for payment. Julia Cruz was different from the beginning. School records from Escuela Elemental de Cañovanas show that she was academically gifted but socially isolated. Her teacher, Maria Rodriguez, later testified that Julia seemed to live in her own world, often talking to herself during recess while other children played together. Rodriguez noted that Julia's drawings were unusually dark for a child her age, featuring creatures with large eyes and sharp teeth that she claimed lived in the forest behind her house. The girl's fascination with the supernatural began early. Father Martinez, the parish priest who knew the family well, recalled that Julia would ask increasingly disturbing questions about angels and demons during religious instruction. She wanted to know if monsters could be friends with humans, if evil creatures could be trained like dogs, and whether God would punish someone for helping a hungry animal, even if that animal was dangerous. The first signs of trouble appeared in early 2004 when the Cruz family began reporting animal deaths on their property. Roberto filed reports with local police describing the discovery of 3 dead chickens in January, 2 goats in March, and a neighbor's dog in April. Each animal showed the same pattern of injuries: 2 small puncture wounds in the neck and complete drainage of blood. The bodies were found arranged in neat rows, suggesting human involvement, but Roberto insisted he had seen nothing unusual. What Roberto didn't report to police was his daughter's behavior during these incidents. Carmen Cruz confided to her sister Rosa that Julia seemed excited rather than frightened by the animal deaths. The girl would wake early on mornings after attacks, rushing outside to examine the bodies before anyone else could see them. When her parents questioned her about this behavior, Julia claimed she was trying to help by cleaning up the mess. Rosa Mendez, Carmen's sister who lived in nearby Bayamon, later provided crucial testimony about the family's deteriorating situation. During a visit in June 2004, Rosa noticed that Julia had begun collecting small bones and unusual rocks in a box hidden under her bed. When confronted, Julia claimed these items were gifts from her forest friend who needed her help because he was hungry and lonely. The psychological evaluation conducted after Julia's arrest revealed a complex picture of a highly intelligent child who had constructed an elaborate fantasy world around the local chupacabra legend. Dr. Elena Vasquez, the forensic psychologist assigned to the case, noted that Julia showed no signs of traditional mental illness, but displayed what she termed adaptive mythological thinking, where supernatural beliefs become functional tools for achieving specific goals. According to Dr. Vasquez's report, Julia had researched the chupacabra extensively, reading every newspaper article and internet post she could find about sightings in Puerto Rico and Mexico. She understood that the creature was feared by adults and that claims of chupacabra activity would be taken seriously by the community. This knowledge became the foundation for what would evolve into her manipulation strategy. The turning point came in August 2004, when Julia's older brother Miguel began questioning her strange behavior. Miguel had noticed that Julia often disappeared for hours after school, returning with dirt on her clothes and what appeared to be animal blood under her fingernails. When he followed her one afternoon, Miguel discovered that Julia was killing small animals herself, using a kitchen knife to create the distinctive twin puncture wounds that characterize chupacabra attacks. Miguel's confrontation with his sister, as recorded in police interviews, revealed the depth of Julia's deception. The girl calmly explained that she was feeding the chupacabra to keep it happy and prevent it from attacking humans. She claimed the creature had spoken to her in dreams, teaching her how to prepare the offerings properly. Most disturbing, Julia told Miguel that the creature was grateful for her help and had promised to protect their family from harm. Miguel's decision to tell their parents about Julia's activities set in motion the final act of the tragedy. Roberto and Carmen confronted Julia on the evening of November 10th, demanding that she stop her bizarre behavior and seek help from Father Martinez. Julia's response, according to surviving family members, was a calm warning that the creature would be angry if his food stopped coming, and that angry creatures sometimes hurt people who interfered with their feeding. The psychological dynamics within the Cruz household during this period were complex and tragic. Carmen, deeply religious and already frightened by the ongoing chupacabra reports, found herself torn between protecting her daughter and protecting the community. Roberto, a practical man who didn't believe in monsters, saw Julia's behavior as a sign of serious mental illness that required professional intervention. Julia's response to her parents' ultimatum demonstrated the sophisticated nature of her psychological manipulation. She began leaving dead animals closer to the house, escalating the apparent threat to the family's safety. She would wake in the middle of the night, claiming to hear scratching sounds outside her window, forcing her parents to investigate and find fresh evidence of supernatural activity. The girl's ability to maintain her deception while simultaneously planning something far more sinister suggests a level of premeditation that chilled even experienced investigators. Police interviews with Julia after her arrest revealed that she had been planning her family's murder for weeks, carefully studying their routines and preparing what she called the final feeding that would satisfy the creature's hunger forever. The night of November 14, 2004, Julia Cruz prepared for what would be her family's last meal together. Carmen had cooked arroz con pollo, a family favorite, while Roberto discussed plans to take Julia to see a psychiatrist in San Juan the following week. Sofia talked about her upcoming quinceañera celebration, and Miguel complained about his girlfriend troubles. By all accounts, it was a normal family dinner, made tragic by the knowledge of what would happen in the hours that followed. Julia waited until her family was asleep before implementing her plan. Using her father's machete, she moved through the house with methodical precision, killing her parents and siblings while they slept. The medical examiner's report shows that each victim died from a single blow to the neck, delivered with enough force to sever the carotid artery. The positioning of the wounds was consistent with someone standing over sleeping victims, suggesting that none of them had time to defend themselves. After completing the murders, Julia spent hours arranging the bodies in the living room, according to what she later described as feeding position. Each family member was placed on their back with their arms at their sides and their necks exposed. Julia then used a kitchen knife to create the characteristic twin puncture wounds that would support her story about the chupacabra attack. The crime scene presented investigators with a puzzle that initially seemed to support supernatural explanations. The house showed no signs of forced entry, the victims appeared to have been killed while sleeping, and the distinctive wound patterns matched previous chupacabra attacks on animals. Julia's survival, she claimed, was due to her special relationship with the creature, which recognized her as a friend and protector. Detective Maria Santos, the lead investigator on the case, later admitted that the scene initially supported Julia's story. The girl's emotional state appeared consistent with trauma. She provided detailed descriptions of the attack that matched physical evidence, and her small size made it seem impossible that she could have overpowered 3 larger family members. It was only during extended questioning that inconsistencies in Julia's story began to emerge. The breakthrough in the case came when forensic analysis revealed that the machete wounds to the victims' necks had been inflicted before the puncture wounds, not after. This timeline contradiction suggested that the chupacabra wounds were staging, created to support a false narrative about the creature's involvement. Further investigation revealed Julia's fingerprints on both the machete and the knife used to create the puncture wounds. When confronted with this evidence, Julia initially maintained her story, insisting that she had only touched the weapons after finding her family's bodies. However, under persistent questioning, she eventually admitted to creating the puncture wounds herself, but continued to claim that the creature had killed her family first. It was only after 3 days of interviews that Julia finally confessed to the murders, explaining her actions as necessary to satisfy the chupacabra's hunger and secure its friendship. Julia's confession, recorded on video and preserved in court records, provides a chilling glimpse into the mind of a child who had constructed an elaborate fantasy to justify unspeakable violence. She described her relationship with the creature in terms of mutual benefit, explaining that she provided food in exchange for protection and companionship. The murders, she claimed, were the creature's idea, communicated to her through dreams and signs that only she could interpret. The most disturbing aspect of Julia's confession was her apparent lack of remorse for her family's deaths. She spoke about the murders in matter-of-fact terms, describing them as necessary sacrifices that had strengthened her bond with the creature. When asked if she missed her family, Julia replied that the creature was now her only family, and that he understood her in ways that humans never could. The trial of Julia Cruz presented unprecedented challenges for the Puerto Rico legal system. At 12 years old, she was below the minimum age for adult prosecution, but the heinousness of her crimes and the premeditation involved made juvenile penalties seem inadequate. The case attracted international attention, with media outlets struggling to balance reporting on the supernatural elements of the story with the reality of a child who had committed triple murder. Dr. Vasquez's psychological evaluation became crucial evidence in determining Julia's fate. The doctor testified that while Julia showed no signs of traditional psychosis or developmental disorders, she displayed what could be described as functional sociopathy, disguised as supernatural belief. Julia understood right from wrong, but had convinced herself that her actions served a higher purpose that justified violating social norms. The question of the Chupacabra's actual existence became a central theme in media coverage of the case. Cryptozoologists and paranormal investigators flocked to Cañovanas, claiming that Julia's story proved the creature was real and had somehow influenced her actions. Local residents were divided between those who saw Julia as a victim of supernatural forces and those who recognized her as a manipulative killer who had exploited community fears for her own purposes. The prosecution, led by District Attorney Carlos Ruiz, argued that Julia's use of Chupacabra mythology was a calculated deception designed to avoid responsibility for her crimes. The evidence showed clear premeditation, sophisticated planning, and an understanding of how to manipulate both physical evidence and community beliefs to support her false narrative. The defense, headed by public defender Ana Torres, attempted to argue that Julia's young age and apparent sincere belief in the creature's existence should be considered mitigating factors. Torres suggested that Julia had been influenced by community hysteria surrounding Chupacabra sightings and had genuinely believed she was protecting her town by feeding the creature. The trial lasted 6 weeks and included testimony from over 40 witnesses, including neighbors who had experienced Chupacabra activity, experts on Puerto Rican folklore, and mental health professionals specializing in childhood psychology. The judge ultimately concluded that while Julia's age prevented adult sentencing, the severity of her crimes required maximum juvenile penalties. On August 18, 2005, Julia Cruz was sentenced to remain in juvenile detention until her 21st birthday, followed by mandatory psychiatric treatment and supervision until age 30. The sentence represented a compromise between recognizing her status as a minor and acknowledging the danger she posed to society. Julia's behavior during her incarceration provided additional insights into her psychology. Counselors at the juvenile facility reported that she continued to claim communication with the Chupacabra for the first 2 years of her detention. She would leave food scraps in her cell window, claiming they were offerings to maintain her supernatural friendship. However, as she matured and received intensive therapy, Julia gradually acknowledged that her beliefs had been delusions. The impact on the Cañovanas community was profound and lasting. Many residents moved away rather than continue living in a place associated with such horror. Property values plummeted, and the local economy, already fragile, suffered as tourism and new business investment dried up. The coffee farm where the murders occurred was abandoned and eventually reclaimed by the forest. The case also had broader implications for understanding how folklore and media coverage of supernatural phenomena can influence vulnerable individuals. Researchers studying the Julia Cruz case noted that extensive media coverage of Chupacabra sightings had created an environment where belief in the creature was not only accepted but encouraged, providing a framework that a disturbed child could exploit. The psychological manipulation demonstrated by Julia Cruz at such a young age raised disturbing questions about early identification of dangerous behavior in children. The warning signs had been present for months, but the community's focus on supernatural explanations had prevented adults from recognizing them as indicators of serious mental health issues. Modern analysis of the case suggests that Julia's crimes might have been prevented if her earlier animal killings had been properly investigated and treated as signs of emerging antisocial behavior rather than evidence of supernatural activity. Child psychologists now use the Cruz case as an example of how environmental factors and community beliefs can influence the development of dangerous behavior patterns in children. The question of whether Julia Cruz genuinely believed in the chupacabra or simply exploited community fears remains debated among experts. Dr. Vasquez's follow-up evaluations during Julia's incarceration suggest that the girl's beliefs existed on a spectrum, with genuine supernatural conviction gradually giving way to conscious manipulation as her plans developed. Julia was released from juvenile detention in 2013 at age 21, having completed her sentence and demonstrated significant progress in therapy. Her current location and activities remain confidential under court order, though reports suggest she has successfully integrated into society and has not reoffended. Some who knew her during detention believe she has genuinely overcome her childhood delusions, while others question whether someone capable of such elaborate deception can ever be truly reformed. The physical evidence from the Cruz murders was eventually destroyed according to court order, but photographic documentation remains in police files. These images continue to be studied by forensic experts interested in understanding how children process and recreate violence they have observed in media and folklore. The abandoned Cruz farm has become an unofficial pilgrimage site for those interested in both true crime and supernatural phenomena. Despite no trespassing signs and regular police patrols, visitors regularly leave offerings near the house foundation, some claiming to seek communication with the chupacabra, others paying respects to the murdered family members. The legacy of the Julia Cruz case extends beyond its immediate horror to raise fundamental questions about the intersection of belief, mental illness, and community responsibility. The story demonstrates how quickly supernatural explanations can be accepted when they provide more comfortable alternatives to confronting human evil, particularly when that evil originates from someone society is predisposed to protect. Local authorities eventually acknowledged that their handling of the earlier animal deaths was inadequate, and that proper investigation might have prevented the human murders. New protocols were established requiring psychological evaluation of children associated with apparent animal cruelty, regardless of suspected supernatural causes. The media coverage of Julia's case also sparked debates about responsible reporting of crimes involving children and supernatural claims. Several news outlets were criticized for sensationalizing the chupacabra angle while downplaying the human tragedy, leading to revised editorial guidelines for covering similar cases. Religious leaders in Puerto Rico used the Cruz case to examine how supernatural beliefs can be distorted by individuals with harmful intentions. Father Martinez, who had known Julia personally, became an advocate for better mental health resources in rural communities and more careful evaluation of children who show unusual interest in violent or supernatural topics. The case files were unsealed in 2019, 15 years after the murders, providing researchers with access to previously classified psychological evaluations and crime scene analysis. This material has been used to develop better understanding of how intelligent children can manipulate adult perceptions and exploit community fears to avoid detection for serious behavioral problems. What makes the Julia Cruz case particularly disturbing is not just the violence itself, but the sophisticated understanding of human psychology demonstrated by someone barely old enough to attend middle school. Her ability to read and manipulate her community's fears, to stage physical evidence supporting her narrative, and to maintain her deception under intense questioning suggests capabilities that challenge our assumptions about childhood innocence and moral development. The story forces us to confront uncomfortable questions about the nature of evil and the role that community beliefs play in either preventing or enabling horrific crimes. Julia Cruz understood that adults would rather believe in monsters than accept that a child could be capable of calculated murder, and she exploited that preference with deadly effectiveness. As we consider this case, we must ask ourselves whether our willingness to believe in supernatural explanations sometimes blinds us to human dangers hiding in plain sight. How many warning signs do we miss because we prefer comfortable myths to uncomfortable realities? And what responsibility do communities bear when their folklore and fears create environments where disturbed individuals can justify unthinkable actions? What do you think about the Julia Cruz case? Do you believe a 12-year-old could be capable of such elaborate deception and calculated violence, or do you think there might have been supernatural influences that we don't fully understand? The evidence seems clear, but the questions it raises about human nature and community responsibility remain as disturbing today as they were in 2004. Share your thoughts in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories that challenge our understanding of the darkness that can hide behind the most innocent faces.